John Carter had spent nearly 20 years working that stretch of Texas land with his own hands, while his family had held ownership of it for generations before him. The soil itself carried stories of droughts endured, of cattle driven across open pastures at sunrise, of a legacy built not on luck, but on relentless, honest work. So when he stepped outside one ordinary morning and heard the deep rumble of heavy machinery tearing through the silence of his property, something in his gut told him this was far from routine. No permit notice had been posted along his fence. No contractor had come knocking at his door. No letter had arrived requesting access. The machines were simply there, carving into land that did not belong to them. He walked along his fence line with the steady, controlled pace of a man who refused to be shaken easily. But what he discovered stopped him in his tracks. Fresh trenches had been cut across his pasture, stretching in a line that sliced through private grazing land as if it were public ground. The construction crew moved with the casual confidence of people who believed they had every right to be there. John approached the foreman and asked a simple, direct question: who had authorized this? The foreman responded by pulling out a folder filled with subdivision documents and municipal permits, pointing to an HOA approval as though that settled everything. But John had never signed a single document. He had never been contacted, never consulted, never compensated. Legally, that changed everything. Back inside his home, John gathered every property record he owned. He laid old surveys beside the new construction route, studying them with the careful attention of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding that land. The conclusion was undeniable. The sewer line being installed ran directly through deeded private ranch property. The Homeowners Association had either made a massive mistake or assumed John Carter would never push back. Either way, that assumption was about to become very expensive. His next stop was a county records office, where staff reviewed the documents with growing concern. There was no recorded easement. No legal right-of-way had ever been granted for a sewer project to cross his land. The HOA had launched a major infrastructure installation on property they had absolutely no authority to use. John contacted the board immediately, expecting at the very least an acknowledgement of the oversight. Instead, he was met with dismissal. The project, they insisted, was necessary and would continue as planned. That refusal to engage defined everything that followed. John did not argue. He did not raise his voice or take to social media. Instead, he quietly began building an airtight case, gathering every document, survey, county record, and permit trail he could find. Attorneys reviewed the evidence and confirmed what the paperwork already showed. The pipeline had no legal standing. While construction crews continued laying pipe through his pasture, and the HOA celebrated what they called neighborhood progress, John was assembling the legal equivalent of a wrecking ball. Weeks passed, and the HOA's confidence never faltered. Then John received official written confirmation from the county. The pipeline was entirely unauthorized, not partially, not technically, completely. Armed with that determination and full legal support, he moved forward with a response the board had never anticipated. County inspectors arrived at the ranch early, before most people had even finished their morning coffee. They walked the entire pipeline route, using measuring equipment and GPS coordinates, documenting every detail. Their findings aligned perfectly with John's surveys. Photographs, coordinates, and property records were compiled into an official report that left no room for interpretation. A formal notice was issued to the HOA board, clearly outlining the violation and offering a window to correct it. The board chose silence. The final deadline passed without a single response. That was all John needed. Contractors he had hired arrived at dawn, supervised by county officials who ensured every step followed proper legal procedure. Workers carefully exposed the unauthorized sections of pipeline, documenting the removal in real time. No shortcuts were taken. No rules were bent. Everything was carried out with precision, professionalism, and full legal authority. The neighborhood quickly erupted. Community forums filled with confusion and concern. Residents who had believed the project was routine suddenly realized they had been kept completely in the dark about a major property rights dispute unfolding in their own community. County representatives stepped in publicly to explain the situation, and the details shocked many who had trusted their leadership. HOA Board Chair Melissa, rather than accepting responsibility, began pointing fingers at engineers, contractors, even the county, anyone but herself. But the legal record was now public, and it told a story no explanation could erase. Board members quietly began distancing themselves from the decision. Internal conflicts fractured the leadership. A community meeting was called, and nearly every homeowner showed up. County officials presented the full timeline: permits, surveys, property maps, and dates, laid out plainly for everyone to examine. Melissa tried to frame the project as a necessary improvement for the neighborhood, but residents were no longer asking whether the sewer line was useful. They were asking why their association had broken the law to build it, and why no one had informed them. Outside consultants hired by the board reviewed the situation and reached the same conclusion the county already had. The pipeline had been installed incorrectly, without legal authority on private land. Financial concerns quickly followed. How much had this cost? How much would it cost to fix? The numbers were significant, and the answers provided by the board fell short. Eventually, under mounting legal pressure and with community trust collapsing, the HOA returned to the table, this time without the arrogance that had defined their earlier stance. Engineers evaluated alternative routes. New plans were developed that followed proper procedures, secured legitimate permits, and avoided private property entirely. A revised project was approved, and construction began again, this time done correctly. Residents watched closely, with a level of scrutiny the board had never experienced before. Transparency was no longer optional. Regular updates were demanded and delivered. In the months that followed, leadership changed hands, with new board members promising the oversight the previous administration had failed to provide. John Carter observed it all from the edge of his ranch, the skies stretching wide over the Texas plains as it often does at dusk. He had never wanted a fight. He had never sought attention, conflict, or legal battles. He had only wanted what every property owner deserves: to be asked, to be respected, to have someone read the deed before sending machines onto land that had belonged to his family for generations. In the end, he got exactly that. And the lesson that settled over the neighborhood, like dust after a long day, was simple: property rights are not suggestions. And the moment you forget that, someone who understands the law better than you ever will remind you, quietly, professionally, and entirely within their rights.